Alex. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be a part of our community of practice channel here on YouTube. And on behalf of SETS, we want to thank you for your leadership today.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. And again, really appreciate all the wonderful work SETSI does to help the social sector continue to evolve and be better at the work that we do. So thank you.
Thank you. So as always, we begin by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we're on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elves and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So if you can please do us by introducing yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your amazing work.
Sure. So my work over the last 2 decades has really focused in on empowering organizations and leaders to create and enhance transformational change. And so I've worked with a variety of nonprofits, charities, and social purpose businesses from across US and Canada. I started my career in trade promotion in Malaysia, and then moved into the international development field where I worked with an organization called MEDA, Mennonite Economic Development Associates. MEDA is based in Kitchener-Waterloo, and so for the listeners who are not familiar with the organization, MEDA takes a business solutions approach towards poverty. So is very much focused on how do we help artisans, smallholder farmers, different low-income households connect into growing markets. And so designed and managed a number of projects in Africa and Asia. During my time at MEDA, part of the work that we did was evolve our model to, instead of operating from Canada, thinking about how we could identify local partners in the countries that we worked, and we called those key facilitating partners. So we found organizations that had really great impact, really strong connections into community, and helped develop their capacity to leverage those strengths by bringing a market-based approach to the work that they do. I left MEDA after several years and moved into the consulting world, where I worked with a boutique consulting firm called Aperio, and our work focused on working with social purpose organizations to really help them think strategically about the future through supports around strategic planning, social enterprise, and strategic partnerships. And most recently, I served as Vice President of Social Impact at Lift Impact Partners, and was there for a decade. Lift is a nonprofit that focuses on working with Canadian nonprofits and charities and helping them think about what is their North Star, helping them invest in their capacity in order to get there, and really helping them scale and grow their impact. So, the common theme across my work has really been around as an intermediary, if you will, so not necessarily directly on the ground myself, but rather really working with leaders and organizations and really helping them think through how they can develop a growth mindset, how they can really push the envelope in the work that they're doing for greater impact. And while I've worked on a number of different social issues, one of the common themes has really been around working around a sense of belonging. So really helping ensure that people are able to live the life they want and they have that sense of belonging, that sense of connection to their communities.
We appreciate all that you do. So, what inspires you about the work that you do?
I think what inspires me about the right now is really around, so right now we're living in an environment which I think is very divisive. If you look at social media and you look at the media, a lot of rhetoric around how polarized we are. But when you stop from looking at the media and actually look at what's happening on the ground, I'm really inspired by how, as communities, we continue to come together. People are really all that we have in this world, and really seeing over the last little while how people, when somebody raises their hand, they need help, the community comes together. So, for example, seeing on LinkedIn a lot of the American colleagues that I have helping those who have been impacted by the cuts, whether it's introducing a career canvas tool to help people think about where they go next or opening up their Rolodex. My mom lives in the area that was affected by the ice storm, and seeing strangers in her neighborhood open their doors to people once they had water for, getting fresh water, battery packs for cell phones, really opening their doors to strangers to help community. So I think, what really inspires me is how we see people coming together as individuals and really trying to bridge connections as opposed to create moats, despite the rhetoric that we see around how divisive we are.
Exactly, exactly. There's still good out there, for sure.
It is, there is. Yeah.
So let me ask you on the other side now, what challenges or barriers have you faced in your work and how have you overcome them or in the process of overcoming them?
Sure. So, it's interesting. I had this conversation and somebody asked me the other day, what is the biggest challenge facing ED executive directors and CEOs right now? And my immediate response was, well, revenue diversification and funding. But I quickly took that answer back because I really feel like the most important challenge that we need to face right now as leaders in the social sector is how do we support our teams? We know that in times of economic uncertainty, mental health challenges increase. We know that people are struggling right now, not sure what the path is going to look like over the next year, given everything that's happening in the world. And so I think really the key challenge for leaders right now is how do you make sure your team feels supported and connected? And so to the second part of your question, how do you address that challenge? Well, it's things like, making sure you're doing one-on-one check-ins with people on your team, whether it's not necessarily a check-in to say, how is XYZ project going, but just a check-in to say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on with you? How can I help you? Having regular team check-ins where you're not necessarily having a set agenda around what you're accomplishing, what you need to talk about, but really just an agenda where you're coming in and saying, what's happening? Where do people need support? How can we come together as a team? I think there's also a key role for leaders to play in terms of modeling how we work through this path of uncertainty. Um, People look to the leaders to see, how are they coping? How are they handling it? And I think as leaders, we need to show that we are creating space for our own mental health as well, and that we are also putting boundaries and really making sure that we're demonstrating how people can support themselves and support their colleagues in these uncertain times. But I don't want to diminish. I mean, the revenue obviously is key. We see government funding decreasing. We see corporations are likely not going to be donating in the same amount that they have been in the past. And, certainly talking to foundations, they are thinking about how do they pivot their philanthropic models. So I think for organizations, in order to overcome those challenges, those that are going to be successful are those that really hone in on what do they do well strategically, really focus in on their core competencies and not try to be everything to everyone. So what does that mean? That means organizations really thinking through how do your different strategies lead to your short, medium, and long-term outcomes? What is your impact data showing you? Organizations that do a portfolio review, thinking about, what programs do you scale, what programs do you maintain, and what programs do you maybe divest from? And also thinking through partnerships. So looking at, who else is working with the communities and clients that you're working with. How can you coordinate efforts? How can you avoid duplication? And how can you really make sure that you hone in on what you do best and then partner with others in other areas? So, I think there's lots of challenges out there that we're facing in this uncertainty, but I think organizations that are very strategic about where they focus their energies, where they focus their efforts, and are very cautious or not cautious, conscientious about how they make sure their team feels supported are the ones that are going to be really able to weather these times.
That's right. And I love that pivot because when you're on a grassroots level, you can really see who are the diamonds within the group. A lot of times we have this, more of a higher role like CEO, but when you really hone in on community and say, hey, what can you do? How can we pull together? Because things are changing. It depends on the lens you're looking at. Some might say, there's hope. Some might say there's no hope. So you gotta find
Yeah.
a happy medium in the social sector, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think it's just asking the question of how you're doing. I don't think people realize how much that means to somebody to have somebody, whether it's their boss, whether it's their colleague, whether it's the CEO, whoever it is, just somebody saying, hey, how are you doing? It means so much. It just sort of shows like, yeah, this person does care about me and they see me as
Hmm.
a person. And again, often when I think sometimes people are afraid to ask that question because they think they're going to have a solution. But that you don't have to have a solution. You can just be an active listener to hear how people are doing. You don't have to fix. They're not looking for you to fix things. They're just looking for you to hear
So true
how they're
to
doing.
hear. So true. So true. We appreciate that. So anything any key priorities or anything you want to amplify this time?
I think for me, what is it a priority or it's really where I'm spending a lot of my intellectual brain power right now is really thinking through systems change. And so, the models that we've traditionally had where organizations manage programs and they run those programs, they've moved the needle, but I don't think they've moved the needle to the full extent that we can be as a sector. And I think it comes down to that old adage of if you give a man a fish, you teach him, or if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And I think that's where we are. But I think what we really need to think about is the third part of that, which is if you revolutionize the fishing industry, you sustain communities for generations. And I think we as organizations and as a sector need to think about not only how are we revolutionizing the sectors that we work in, whether it's disability, employment, settlement, but also as a social sector ourselves, how are we revolutionizing how we work? So that for me is really where I'm trying to, have conversations and unpack and think through what are the different ways that we can look for multiplier effects? What are the different ways that we can really figure out, what is the real root causes and how do we address them in a way that's not piecemeal, but is actually very collaborative and bringing different sectors together.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's awesome. All right, so we are already at the end of the session. It was very impactful. You gave a lot of information that is so necessary, you know. So my last question is, you have any closing thoughts, calls to actions that we can take from today?
Sure. So, I think everyone in the social sector, we're doing excellent work. We're very good about um, focusing in on, how can we make a change in the communities that we're working with. But I think sometimes we become too myopic and we keep focusing on our work and we don't necessarily bring our head up to really think about what else we could be doing. And so my call to action to everyone is to really bring your head up from your work and think about who else should you be connecting with. Think about the tables and spaces that you're sitting at, who's missing from those tables, and how do you ensure that they are able to come into those tables and have an active voice. Thinking about, if you're a foundation, think about what are the other foundations that are addressing a similar issue as you, and how can you work with those foundations to think about a different way in which you do your philanthropy. If you're a settlement agency, that think about, is there an employment agency that you're working with that you can work with to think about how you can help enhance their services to newcomers? Or if you're a disability organization, are you connecting with youth organizations to think about how you can collaborate together to look at solutions for youth with disabilities? So it would really be bringing your head up from your work, looking around to see who else is doing great work, making sure that you're thinking about those unusual suspects. It's not just the other nonprofits in your sector. It's also the corporations. It's also the policy think tanks. It's the others in your world who care about the same issues you do, and really think about how can you develop those meaningful strategic connections to really get systemic change and long-lasting transformational change in Canada.
That's right. That's right. Well, we appreciate all that you do. We wish you much more health and strength so you can carry on this mission because we are laying a foundation, but it's generational.
Yes.
We will soon have to pass the baton and keep this going. But
Well,
once again,
no, I was just going to say, I know, one of the things that is critical for me is really thinking about what success of this work looks like. And, I think for me, it comes back to where I saw, and to your point about continuing the work on, it comes back to that sense of belonging. And, if we can create a world where nobody has to wear a mask, anyone can show up wherever they want to be, being their true, authentic self. I see with my son, who's 9 years old, there's some things about his childhood that's very different from mine, but unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are still the same. And so I think if we can create a world where people can be truly their authentic self and truly show up, not having to worry about others' expectations or other norms, but just be themselves, then that would be a wonderful place.
oh, amen. I love that. I love that. So once again, Alex, we thank you so much. And collaboration is a key to social change. So I know that we'll still be doing some collaboration together. Victor will reach out to you. So on behalf of SETI, once again, I thank you for your leadership today.
Well, thank you very much, Mahat. I really appreciate the work that SETSI's doing. You're really helping us be better as a sector. So keep up the good work and excited to continue on the conversations.
Awesome. So we will close the way that we began by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toil without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, Alex, will definitely be in touch, okay? Thanks
Okay,
again.
great. Thank you so much. Have a
All
wonderful
right,
day.
dear.
Thanks.
You too. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.